Welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz. So happy to have you with us as we're starting the conversation about lots of different topics in the Catholic faith. We've been having fun providing this podcast, and thank you for continuing to send your comments, your feedback, and all those things. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined by the two guys I went out for wings with this past week, Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan. Wasn't that a good time?
That was a great time.
I know. It was the first time I've been out in like a restaurant setting.
Since March?
Yeah. And
It's the first time.
Okay.
It's the first time I've been out. Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Just period. We had to drag you out of the... Yeah, people don't know that we filmed this podcast in your basement.
Right. Yeah.
That's not true. What's new and exciting? Like, schools opened last week. The government said we're not lifting any restrictions for another month.
Yeah.
Lots of different things happening. It was busy at church this past weekend.
Yeah.
So
I think it's kind of nice to start to get, I think for myself anyways, and our family, because I'm a teacher, a lot of our life, and my kids, a lot of our life revolves around school. And specifically, so when we get to the end of the school year, summer is just kind of no schedule, no nothing. Like, there's not a lot of stuff planned. We try to get a lot done and we'll have a lot of fun, but there's not a lot of routine. And now we kind of go, okay, now we can get back to a routine kind of life, and we can kind of, and for me, I need routine to kind of get things done. All the things I wanted to do during the summer that I couldn't get done, I can get done in a routine. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, and you have lots going on. You got your family, you got your kids, you're teaching, you're doing all those things.
So routine is really good for me to have that. I feel like at the end of the day, then like 9 o'clock, I can sit down on a couch and just kind of sit down and watch a little bit of TV and feel relaxed.
Yeah.
Versus like all summer, I work until like sometimes 11:30 at night, and then just be like, okay, but I gotta relax. So what can I do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This past Sunday, Matt, I don't know if you knew, but there was a lady driving by the church in Calendar, and she yelled through the window how much she liked Josh on the Catholic Buzz podcast. So it was he has fans.
It's good.
He has fans.
I try. It's the bald head. Everyone likes the bald head.
At least one.
At least one fan that we know of,
Yeah.
and that just made Josh's week. Yeah, he's so excited.
So shout out to you.
Shout out to that one fan. What else has been going on that are up and around our life here? I'm trying to think. Like, I've been talking to a number of students. They feel safe at school. They're enjoying being back. What's it been? You guys are teaching online.
Yeah. So the school too, though, is the high schools, I think in particular, are doing that 8 octal, whatever it is.
That's in our local area.
Local area. I got to be honest, being a high school teacher before, I don't know how. So the teachers and the students out there, bravo to you, because that has got to be one heck of a schedule. So for those of you who don't know, what that does is it's basically your whole school day. Instead of being split into 4 classes like normal, that would be a normal. Most schools around here, I think, go on that. They split it into one class for 20, 25 days straight. And then they move on to the next class.
So a teacher would have the same students teaching the same subject all day.
Day in, day out for 20, exactly, 22, 25, whatever it is. So some subjects not so bad, there's like things like drama, to me, things like drama and things where you have a little bit of theory, but then you get a little practice and you kind of space the day. Even gym class, sometimes you can kind of get that. Things though, but like I'm a math and computer science teacher. Oh, I couldn't imagine doing math for 23 days straight.
6 hours a day.
6 hours a day, all the time. And then you don't have time as a teacher. Think of the time trying to prepare the tests, all that stuff. That's got to be tough for them. I'm glad they're enjoying it. And there is like, it's new, it's different. It's kind of for the students, I imagine. It's kind of fun. It might get old fast, but it's kind of fun. It's kind of and it's a switch up every 20 days, 20 some days.
It'll be interesting to see once we come out the other end of this, how effective that is as a teaching model too.
Yeah,
that it could be like if you're that focused, if you're that dedicated for that time period. I wonder if like the actual learning outcomes would be.
Or is there a time where you just burn out and never like retain anything?
And
that's
it's like
the second day.
Again, you have math now, like in March or April. Are you going to remember what you've learned in that 4 weeks of math in September?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't know. It is true to be.
I think it would add in a different teaching element. Like, I would teach differently 20 some days in a row than I would, like for right now, I see my students twice a week, for 14 weeks.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I would treat them completely different teaching style for that, maybe break up math into the different categories of math, whatever it might be.
I would have the best time teaching religion for 3 weeks straight to the same kids. Oh my gosh, we'd have so much fun.
It would be a lot of fun.
I would love it. Honestly, I would love it. One more thing. Oh, by the way, before we jump topics, kudos to our teachers.
Oh yeah,
kudos to our teachers.
100%. Working through this right now.
They're working through it. They did it. People are safe and schools are open. So kudos to them.
And to the students that
continue to
are living through it too.
Yeah.
They're interesting times, but good job. Keep going.
Yeah, and it's not been easy. Like buses were canceled.
I
There
know.
wasn't enough bus drivers, and like all these setbacks. And so yeah, kudos to our teachers who are doing a fantastic job. One more thing I want to mention before we continue on is that this current week is Smile Cookie Week at Tim Hortons, and not that our podcast is sponsored by Tim Hortons or anything, but because in our local area, in our North Bay area, the Tim Hortons has chosen our local hospice as the recipient of
I think that's
all the
great.
money raised from the Smile Cookies, which is beautiful because the hospice is a place Catholics should support because it provides proper end-of-life care for people in line with the teachings of our Catholic faith. And you don't see that anywhere. You don't see that a lot of places
And they've been
anymore.
standing by that. They've been standing
They're
by
standing by
their
it.
whole purpose of being, which is the proper end of life care.
Right.
To have someone die respectfully and in peace, and you know what I mean, like just to
Yeah.
give them that time to just pass away, you
Yeah.
know, with family and surrounded.
We talked about that, I think, during episode 12 of
Yeah.
the Catholic Buzz. But so beautiful. If you're hungry this week or you have $1 in your pocket, go and buy a Smile Cookie from Tim Hortons and support the local hospice.
Yep.
I swear, Matt, by the end of this week, I will buy you a Smile Cookie.
I was going to say, even if you're not hungry and you have $1 in your pocket, you can
Go
just
buy one.
and send them to my basement, care of the Catholic Buzz.
We'll send them to Matt's
Yeah,
basement.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We'll just leave them at the door because you won't come out to get it. We'll just leave them in a little package
yeah.
there. But seriously, beautiful choice by Tim Hortons to support the hospice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can do a great job. That being said, today we have lots of things to talk about because one thing that, we've been doing the Catholic Buzz podcast for a long time. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet is the Mass.
Source and summit.
Yeah, it's the source and summit of our prayer, of our faith, and Mass is where our community gathers. So today we're just going to break down the Mass. We're going to look at why the Mass is important, sort of the history of it, what is happening at Mass, and help people better understand it, I guess. Okay? So what do you, maybe the very first place we should start was the reason we celebrate Mass and the reason it is the main prayer of our church is because Jesus commanded it, right?
That's easy.
People think, well, why is the Mass like this? Why don't they? People ask the question, why can't they change Mass? Why can't we make it more like this or less like that or whatever it might be? Jesus commanded the Mass, and he celebrated the first Mass here on earth on the day of the Last Supper, the night before he was crucified. So that's first and foremost probably a good place to start. Yeah. And that's where, and I love, the Holy Thursday, the Mass of the Lord's Supper, where we commemorate that, the first Mass being celebrated, the institution of the priesthood, all those things that go together with the Mass. I think it's beautiful.
I think so too. I love just understanding the tradition of where the Mass came from too. Like understanding that the first part of the Mass, a lot of times, if you were to go to a Jewish synagogue and you were to go to a Mass, they look very, if you, in a different language, let's say, the look and what's happening is very similar for the first little bit, right? And then we get into the liturgy of the Eucharist, which is different. But that first part of reading the scriptures and reading that kind of stuff is very similar to in celebrations in the synagogue where like Jesus would have actually read from the Torah or read from scriptures and from prophets and the Psalms and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think,
I just kind of structurally we take for granted that I've been Catholic for 10 years, and I'm already at the point where it's familiar enough that you can go through the Mass without being conscious of okay, what's coming up next, or like you don't want to look silly when you're new. But that structure and that the form of the Mass has changed very, very little, and not really at all in essential or significant ways since the beginning. So you have Jesus instituting the Mass itself, and then throughout the apostolic age, you have them conducting the Mass in the way that they got firsthand from Jesus, and then you even have like early church document, or like this is the early church missal, as we would understand it. And structurally, it's almost identical to the Mass we celebrate, which, being familiar with it is pretty easy to take for granted. But, being
almost
a post-Protestant,
Yeah.
that it's, we talked a little while ago about, innovations to the Mass, innovations to the liturgy, like what can be changed, what can't be changed. That in a Protestant context, we followed an order of service, and the order of service was completely up to the pastor or whomever
Or
is
the
leading,
elders of
leading
community.
that particular kind of community or denomination, and is subject to just about any kind of innovation. So I think it's something that struck me coming into the church is that the Mass is common, the structure and the content of the Mass is common across the church right now, but we're actually, understood properly, we're in communion with the history of the church as well.
Yeah.
So that we're celebrating,
The same Mass.
the same Mass
Yeah.
at the same time in the same or very similar way.
Yeah, and what's beautiful is that when I've traveled to Europe and all these different places, that you can be, so I guess just quickly, the Mass that was celebrated, remember Christians were persecuted for so long, right, after the death of Jesus. So the Mass that people were celebrated were sort of hidden, secret Masses. And there was a place, I believe it was Rome, it was maybe 10 years ago that I was there now, but where St. Peter had actually celebrated Mass. And you have to go down into this dark,
Oh,
like,
on the
little,
very bottom,
yeah,
underneath the church.
yeah,
Yeah,
and like he would celebrate Mass there in secret because they were persecuted. But you can find the same elements. Like they had this little altar, little thing to read the scriptures from, and just that connection to our history, our historical faith is just beautiful.
Yeah.
When you sit, and I think you're right, Matt. We take that for granted when we sit in the pew and we participate in Mass, right?
Yeah.
That it's been something going on for such a long time, and not as free as it is now. Like, people suffered, people hid in their little houses, in little communities, in little different places.
We talk about the Mass and the catacombs, and actually a lot of the history things now take significance from, but were practical use back then. Things like, so one of my favorite parts, I went to Rome probably, I think it was in 2013, 2014, somewhere around there. I brought a bunch of teenagers to Rome, and the priest that was with us, Father Terry, he used backdoor connections to let us be able to celebrate the Mass inside the catacombs. So they had a little spot in catacombs that we could celebrate the Mass. And I got to be honest, like we saw St. Peter's Square, the Vatican, we saw everything, 10 days. The highlight of my trip was 10 of us stuck in a room, probably about the size of the bathroom here, like just so small. COVID standards definitely not out, out the window. But we were stuck in this little room with, like you said, like a little altar, and Father actually like faced the wall at that time because the tomb that we were standing over was there. So he's facing the wall, and the candles and everything else. And then to read, we had the candles turned around, but it was all the elements were there, and we're all squished into this little area. But it was a place that we could do it. We could sing, and no one could really hear us. But it was beautiful, and I got to be honest, probably one of my favorite times to celebrate the Mass ever in my life so far was at that time in the catacombs, just realizing the connection that I had to history at that point. Even to the point of realizing like the light. We moved the light to the liturgy of the Word and then to the liturgy of the Eucharist and stuff. But in practical days, we're in the catacombs. If they're hiding in the catacombs or hiding in the thing, it was to read the scriptures and then so you could see what was going on the altar. Like the candles were there for a reason. Now it has different significance, but all those little things were there. All the elements were there, right? Kind of cool.
It's true. What you see in today's Mass is very similar to like Matt was saying. Nothing has been sort of added or changed, or it's the Mass that Jesus celebrated, that the early church fathers would have celebrated, and Catholics celebrate through history. But you're right, the significance of stuff like candles. Candles were lots of candles because they needed light. Yeah. Incense. What was incense used for at first?
Initially practical, yeah.
It was practical.
10 people stuck in a small room.
To cover the smells.
In a smell. Yeah, I was going to say 10 people stuck in a small room with dead bodies. I mean, they're
right? So like all these things that... And the priest, when he washes his hands before he celebrates the liturgy, is not because of COVID-19. It's because the offerings people would bring, right? The offerings would be sometimes livestock and sometimes different things that they could offer to the church.
Instead of cash during a donation basket.
Yeah, exactly. So he washed his hands from touching all these other things.
That's cool. I never thought of that.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
Like lots of different things that I think sometimes we just take for granted because we don't understand. So what did the Mass look like sort of in the first 300 years of Christian persecution? They were really like just communities at home praying together. Eh?
Yeah, and I imagine it would have been different in different areas under different, degrees of maybe Roman persecution.
Yeah.
That it's in some areas it was more possible for the apostles to gather, even when they returned to Jerusalem in the Book of Acts. They're able to much more openly kind of celebrate Mass. But yeah, Saint Peter in Rome at the height of kind of early Christian persecution. That's when you have the catacombs, or that's when you're for a period of about
A couple hundred years.
yeah, 250
Exactly.
years. Yeah.
And that was the place where Christians gather. So that's why it's important for the community to come together, to celebrate together. So that's why, people from all walks of life come to the church on Sunday to celebrate together, because Christians need to be together. And people were doing that sort of in various ways back in the day.
Yeah.
But it was always the same. There was a celebrant, right? The priest who was celebrating the Mass. He would gather the people around him. There would be readings from the scriptures, like you were saying, similar to the temple and the Jewish temples. And then people would bring their offerings and the celebration of the Eucharist. People would receive the Eucharist and be sent,
Go evangelize.
I'm trying to think of the words at the end of Mass there.
Go in peace.
Go in peace.
Love and
to
serve
love and serve the Lord. Or, go. That's your mission. You've received the Eucharist. Go now.
Yeah.
And make disciples of all nations, or whatever it might be. So
I think it's something that a lot of times, I know that I forget a lot, because it is tradition, and it is something we go through every step. I do it every Sunday. And if you wanted to, you could do it every day, right? I mean, there's Mass going on, most areas anyways, almost every day, that you can participate in. And forgetting that structure is part of that, but realizing that it's not just it's not just a good thing to do. Jesus commands of it, but also it's meant for something, and that's to, we receive the Eucharist, it feeds our soul. It's spiritual food. And then you have all sorts of amazing stuff going on in the Mass. From we talked about, there's 4 different types of prayer. So you have thanksgiving, adoration, contrition, and supplication. Thank you. So you have all those forms of prayer. Those are all different types of prayer, but you have all of those inside the prayer of the Mass itself. So you are thanksgiving at times, you're adoring at times, you are asking God for stuff sometimes, and then as well as contrite. You're contrite. There's 4 or 5 times throughout the Mass where you are contrite, asking God for forgiveness as well. And so all those things happen in the Mass. It's like the perfect prayer, like the ultimate prayer, right? Because you have all those things kind of going on. So realizing it's meant as a source of food, not as a source of entertainment.
yeah,
Right.
It's not something that we do because it's a cultural thing. I don't go to Mass because I have to, because my mom's going to get mad if I don't.
yeah. And that's a good point. That everything in the Mass it points towards our Christian life as in general. How we gather together. Christians are supposed to find friendship with other Christians. How we're sorrowful for our sins at the beginning, when we take a moment to call to mind our sins, and our venial sins are forgiven at that part of the Mass. How we bring our offerings, we bring ourselves, we bring our prayers, we bring everything about us comes into that celebration, into God's house, right? And then, of course, we receive the Eucharist. Our Christian life is nothing without Jesus. Right? And so we come and we receive him in the sacramental way, and then we're sent forth. That's at the end. We're sent forth to be the Christians outside of that building, right? Everything about the celebration of Mass is parallel to the Christian life that we're supposed to be living.
Realize who you are, ask for forgiveness, then ask for God's help. Offer yourself over, ask for God's help, let God fill you up, and now go out and be a good Christian.
And is parallel as well with the sort of whole, I guess, narrative arc of salvation history. That it's, we were talking to our Ascent group last year, pre-COVID, and we talk about the Mass, that it's a progressive kind of departure from our normal temporal ordering, the way we understand time, our daily concerns. That the example, especially with kids, is kind of pertinent. That you're concerned with, like, okay, we have to get there on time. We have to, like, Samuel's shoes. That it's like you're concerned about, like, really practical human things as you're getting up to the point where you're starting Mass. And Mass progressively kind of brings you out of that space of being concerned with worldly matters. That it's like you're even in later episodes we'll go through kind of structurally how that works. But you progressively go from being concerned with your own affairs to entering into the kind of eternal ordering of time. That and yeah, each part of the Mass kind of brings you further and further into that, to the point of kind of the Eucharist, when you enter that kind of prayer of adoration, or that prayer of you're with the angels in heaven, you're adoring God. And then you're slowly brought out of that again, and then at the end you're sent back into the world, having been fed and having that experience.
Yeah, and it's beautiful because, like, there's, with just like anything with our faith, there's the visible and the invisible, right? So the visible is when we're in our church and we see the things that we see the reader, we see the priest, we see the bread and wine, we see the servers, or all those different things. The invisible is very beautiful if we're conscious of it, right?
What's going
on? Like the angels, the saints who are joining us for Mass, the miracle. I think I can't stress that enough. The miracle that happens every Sunday we're at Mass, or every time we participate in Mass, we take that for granted. People ask for miracles all the time. One is at our disposal every time we gather together for the Eucharist. The bread and the wine are changed, literally changed by the Holy Spirit, into the body and blood of Jesus. And when we're not focused on that, that just sort of happens, and sort of life passes us by, right? And I think that is maybe a major problem why people don't understand why it's important for us to gather at Mass, is if we don't understand the miracle there, if we don't understand that's the point, the sacrifice of the Mass, to come to receive the body of Jesus. That can't happen anywhere else. That miracle happens only in God's church.
There's a picture that I see when as you're saying that. There's a picture that I saw one time, which is awesome. I don't know who drew it or whatever. It's an old time picture, but it is of heaven opening up, and touching down on earth. Yeah. And so as the priest offering up during the time of consecration, or it's through him, with him, in him, whatever, the time he's holding up the Eucharist in front of us, and heaven, like the angels are all about it, but it's heaven opened up on earth. Yeah, like it's a time that heaven and earth are kind of connected, isn't it? This like weird time warp thing, but and then the angels. And I remember hearing a priest talking about, if you could hear how the angels are praying at this time. It's not holy, 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 Lord God, Almighty, whatever. That's not the prayer that's going on. It's holy, like just it just like the reverence, but also the awe of God is right there, and just like the, oh my gosh, like holy, Yeah. And so I'm guilty of having skimmed over that part of the Mass and worrying about my kids' shoes. You know what I mean? I definitely worry about that. I mean, I've done that, but there are times where I've been able to enter in not as much as I would have liked to necessarily, but times that when I can enter in, that I've entered in, and I go, wow, this is so amazing. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't want this part to end. Stop here. We'll stop Mass. And
there are moments that you're kind of acutely aware of what's going on, like the significance and the gravity of what's actually happening in the Mass. That's a really popular kind of composition in Renaissance and medieval religious art. That it's that you have what's happening in the Mass and the
physical world.
Yeah, you have like heaven opening up, and to the point where there's like no clear distinction between what's heaven, what's earth, what's like. And you said the miracle of what's happening in the Mass. It's also that's occurring in a mysterious way that we don't. If we were like fully aware of what's happening in Mass every single time, like if you look at the Incarnation as probably the most significant event of human history, arguably. But the death and resurrection are,
up there.
Yeah. I think it's a dead heat actually. But look, and relevant to what we're saying about the Mass as well. That it's like this is a historical event, something that happened, but it's something that happens every single time at the Mass. That Mass is at the same time a celebration that God stepped into the world. It's also
Yeah, he
a
does that
sacrifice.
every
It's a
time.
funeral.
Yeah.
It's a wedding banquet. It's all of these things simultaneously in a mysterious way, and all of these things aren't just kind of like some distant analogous thing. They're happening in a real substantive way.
We
Yeah.
talked about it too, how it happens to something that people might not realize, but it does happen because of time differences and time changes. It happens all the time, and like there's a mass going on somewhere in the world every minute of every day. There's a so because of time change and everything, and it's the same mass. It's the same, maybe different language, but the same mass going on, and so there's perpetual mass constantly throughout the world. So Christ never. I mean, we've got him here in the tabernacle and everything, but he's like, I heard talks and about the second coming of Christ. Well, that could be happening, in the future sometime, but it happens at the altar every day, all the time.
Yeah. I think the word there, the technical word, is anamnesis, right? The Mass is a remembrance of the sacrifice of Jesus. So that's happening, as you're saying, on the altar to recall the passion, the death. That's what a Mass is. Remember, even in the words of institution, do this in memory of me. We're recalling the passion, the death of Jesus, as if it's present here in this moment. We're not re-crucifying Jesus or anything like that, but it's present among us in that sacrifice of the Mass. And I think we don't always call that to mind, when we're celebrating, because, like you say, we take for granted Jesus is here in the tabernacle. Jesus is present in all these different things. But I think that's really important. That's something maybe we're not passing down to our children or passing down to the next generation of why Mass is important, because when it's just our nature when we gather in a crowd to expect to be entertained.
That's right.
Right? You sit in a theater, you sit in an arena, anywhere where people gather, you kind of want to watch a spectacle. Well, it's the Mass is not a spectacle. It's we bring our full selves into it, right? To be part of this.
If it was, the church is a really bad manager of entertainment because it hasn't changed what it's doing in 2,000 years. We just talked about
the same show.
The same show for 2,000 years, every day, all day, all throughout the world.
There's no suspense. Like, what's going to happen? Yeah.
So it's not. I mean, obviously, it's something different. There's something different going on. This is not meant to just be entertained. There are times where we get to think, like during the readings, during the homily. Things that we like, times that we can make some crucial discoveries or thinking or some self-reflection, if you will. And then there's times too that we are sorrowful, where it just kind of brings us through it. Like there's a whole bunch just going on at the whole time in Mass, but not for entertainment.
Not for entertainment.
Sometimes people's children can be entertained during Mass.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
it's not the purpose.
We come together, and I like how you mentioned that it's happening all around the world, because Catholics around the world are celebrating at the same time throughout the entire world. It's the same Mass, the same readings. So if you're on vacation, you can't travel anymore right now.
No.
But if you're on vacation, you can go and still have the same. But I think people don't understand that it's the church around the world. And in our Mass, we pray for the church throughout the world together with them in unison. We're praying together as a Catholic community across the world. Right?
That was cool when I was in Rome. That's one of the things, because most of the Mass was in Italian or other languages, because there's a couple different churches that we went to and they had different languages. But I very rarely was in English unless we celebrated it ourselves. And so it was really cool to go to these Masses, not understand really a word, however, understand exactly what was going on in the entire Mass. So I couldn't understand the homily. I didn't get the readings necessarily, although if they started saying words like Abraham, I knew what was going on, you know what I mean? But could kind of pick up what's going on. But the Mass was still the Mass. I was still there. I could see the Eucharist. I understood what was going on. I knew when consecration was. I knew when I was meant to be, mea culpa, that all that kind of stuff was going on. I could tell in the Mass what was going on. So it's kind of cool.
Yes, and so for the next couple episodes, we're going to break down the Mass.
Let's
right?
do it.
We're going to go through
so much there.
There's so much to do and understand about the Mass, and I think it's really important that we spend the time on it, because that is the main prayer of the Church, the main way that we come together and pray. Right. So the next couple episodes, we're going to do that, and we invite those who are listening to really find to re-enter into the Mass in a new way, right? To offer yourselves completely, to pay attention to things, to listen, and to try and enter more deeply into the Mass. I must admit, some churches you go to, easier to do than others, right? Like there's just so much distraction, and there's,
And how you go to Mass, too. Are you distracted?
Yeah.
Whether it be because of kids, that's different, but also what's going on in your personal life. Are you able to leave it at the door? Are you able to kind of...
True. Our own preparation for Mass makes a difference. Yep. So we'll talk about that next couple episodes. I guess we're going to break down the Mass. It's been great to give a little preview of what's happening, and it's always good to talk about Mass because it is, like I celebrate Mass every day. It's a beautiful gift for me as a priest, and I think it's a beautiful gift for Catholics, period, to be part of the Mass. Don't forget, whatever you do, Josh, Matt, get a smile cookie this week, okay? Get a smile cookie, and if you don't want to eat it, drop it off for me, okay? If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions for us at The Catholic Buzz, email it to thecatholicbuzzpodcast@gmail.com. For Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, I'm Father Daniele, and we'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.